welcome to Leadership with Purpose. We often talk about the need for strong leadership, but what does that really look like when things get tough? When you're in the middle of a huge change or facing uncertainty about what's coming next?
That's such a crucial question because it's easy to talk about leadership in general terms. But when the pressure is on, when things are shifting rapidly, that's when the rubber really hits the road.
Exactly. So for this episode, we're going to really dive into how leaders can effectively navigate periods of significant change and uncertainty. We've been looking at a bunch of research articles, even some case studies, to understand what really makes a difference in those moments.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is that it's not just about, having a plan or a set of strategies. It goes deeper than that. It connects to how people react to uncertainty on a psychological level. And then, of course, there's the critical role of communication, how leaders can articulate a vision that gives people a sense of direction. And we can't forget the ethical aspects of leadership, which become even more pronounced during upheaval. So yeah, we've got a lot to unpack.
We do. But let's start with something pretty fundamental. When we talk about uncertainty, it's not just a feeling, right? There's a real psychological and even physiological impact that uncertainty has on people.
Oh, absolutely. Our sources highlight that uncertainty can actually trigger a threat response in the brain. And what's interesting is this isn't just about feeling anxious or stressed. It's actually affecting how we think and make decisions.
So it's like our brains kind of go into survival mode.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes sense if you think about it. Back in the day, when humans were out in the wild, uncertainty often meant danger. So our brains developed this mechanism to help us react quickly to potential threats. But in today's world, it's not always so helpful. It can really affect our ability to focus, to think clearly, and to problem solve effectively. One of the studies we looked at found that prolonged uncertainty can actually cause a temporary decrease in working memory capacity, which is kind of a big deal when you're trying to make important decisions.
So, as a leader, if you know that your team is likely experiencing this kind of threat response in the face of uncertainty, what are some of the most effective ways to respond?
The most crucial thing is to create a sense of psychological safety within your team. Now, this doesn't mean sugarcoating things or pretending that everything is fine. In fact, the research strongly suggests that honesty and transparency are key. But it's about acknowledging the anxieties that people are feeling and letting them know that it's okay to feel that way. Leaders need to create an environment where people feel comfortable voicing their concerns, asking questions, even expressing their doubts. And then, of course, there's the practical side of providing support.
Like, what kind of support are we talking about?
It can take many forms. Offering flexible work arrangements, making sure people have access to mental wellness resources, maybe providing opportunities for stress reduction activities. It's also about regularly checking in with your team members, not just about their work, but about how they're doing.
And it seems like it's not just about dealing with the immediate anxiety of a situation, but also about equipping people to handle ongoing uncertainty. So building resilience within the team is also really important, right?
Absolutely. A lot of the sources we looked at emphasize the importance of fostering a growth mindset. So instead of viewing challenges as insurmountable obstacles, encouraging people to see them as opportunities for learning and development, reframing situations like that can have a huge impact on people's outlook. And then, of course, providing resources and tools for stress management and overall well-being. When you do that, you're sending a clear message. The organization cares about its people, and we're going to support you through this.
I like that. Okay, so we've talked about the psychological impact, but there's another piece that might seem obvious, but it's absolutely critical during times of change: communication. And the sources we looked at really drove home the power of clear, open, and honest communication.
Yeah. And the key takeaway here is that transparency builds trust. Even when the news isn't great, even when you don't have all the answers yet, being open about what you do know and acknowledging what you don't know can actually reduce anxiety. Uncertainty often thrives in the absence of information. When people are kept in the dark, they tend to fill in the gaps with their own assumptions, which often aren't accurate and can lead to even more stress and worry. But when leaders communicate openly and regularly, it helps people feel more informed and more in control.
So regular updates are important, right?
Yeah.
And not just one-way communication.
Yeah, exactly. Creating opportunities for feedback is crucial. It's about having those two-way conversations where people feel like they can ask questions, share their concerns, and be heard. And this is where active listening becomes so important.
And I imagine it's also crucial to not just communicate about what's happening right now, but also to paint a picture of where things are headed. This is where the concept of vision comes in.
Right. Even in the middle of all the change and uncertainty, Leaders need to be able to articulate a clear vision for the future. This isn't about pretending that everything's stable, but rather about grounding people in the organization's core values, its purpose, and its long-term goals. A strong vision provides that sense of direction, that North Star that people can look to even when the present feels turbulent.
It makes me think of that quote, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Without a clear vision, it's easy to get lost in the chaos.
Exactly. And a compelling vision is also about reminding people why their work matters, especially during times of change. It's about connecting their individual efforts to the bigger picture, to the impact the organization is trying to make.
Now, we've talked about managing the psychological impact and the power of communication. But what about actually being able to adapt and change direction when necessary? The sources we looked at also touched on cultivating adaptability and agility within organizations.
And one of the things that really stood out to me is that, it's not enough to just tell people to be adaptable. You have to create a culture that genuinely embraces change, a culture where experimentation is encouraged, where people feel safe to try new things, even if they don't always succeed. And this starts with leadership. Leaders need to model this kind of adaptability in their own behavior, in their decision-making, in the way they approach challenges.
Yeah, it's like walking the talk, right? You can't just preach adaptability. You have to actually embody it.
Right. And the sources also highlighted the importance of empowering people at all levels of the organization to make decisions. Of course, clear guidelines and a strong strategic direction are still important, but giving people more autonomy can significantly increase agility and responsiveness. Think about it. The people closest to the work, the people who are actually dealing with the day-to-day changes, they're often in the best position to make quick, informed decisions.
And they're the ones who are most likely to see the opportunities and challenges that arise from those changes.
Precisely. So empowering your team, giving them the space to make those decisions, that can be a real game changer. And it can also foster a stronger sense of ownership and innovation within the organization.
And what about being prepared? The sources also mention the importance of developing contingency plans and being ready for different potential scenarios.
Yeah, scenario planning is crucial. It's about being proactive, thinking through the potential risks and challenges that might arise, and outlining how the organization would respond in different situations. Now, this doesn't mean trying to predict the future or eliminate uncertainty entirely. It's more about, having a framework for decision making. Having a plan, or even multiple plans, can really help to reduce that sense of panic and chaos when unexpected things happen.
It makes sense. If you've already thought through some of the possibilities, you're not starting from scratch when things get tough.
Exactly. And we saw some great examples in the research of organizations that had done this really well. One company, for instance, had developed 3 different scenarios for how they would respond to a potential economic downturn. And when a downturn actually happened, they were able to pivot much more quickly and effectively because they had already done a lot of the thinking and planning in advance.
That's a great example. Now, I want to shift gears a bit and talk about the ethical considerations that come into play when leading through change and uncertainty. It's one thing to make decisions when things are stable, but when you're in the middle of a crisis or facing a lot of unknowns, it can raise some really complex ethical dilemmas.
Oh, absolutely. And what the sources really emphasize is that leaders need to be even more mindful of ethical considerations during these times. When things are tough, there can be a temptation to focus solely on the bottom line, on just getting through the crisis. But it's essential to remember that your decisions have ripple effect. They impact your employees, your customers, your shareholders, and even the wider community.
So it's about taking a broader perspective and thinking about the long-term consequences of your actions.
Yeah, and it's about being fair and equitable in your decision making. Who benefits from this decision and who might be negatively impacted? Are we treating everyone with respect and dignity, even in the midst of difficult choices? These are the questions leaders need to be asking themselves constantly.
And transparency and accountability are also critical, right?
Absolutely. Being honest about the challenges the organization is facing, being open about the decisions you're making and the reasons behind them, and taking responsibility for the outcomes, both the good and the bad. That kind of transparency is crucial for building and maintaining trust, especially when times are tough.
And it seems like the sources also highlighted the role of the organization as a whole during times of crisis.
Yes, there's this idea that organizations have a responsibility that extends beyond just their own operations. Especially during a crisis, leaders should consider how they can support their communities, how they can help their employees who might be struggling, and how they can minimize any negative impacts their actions might have. It's about seeing the organization as part of a larger ecosystem and acting in a way that benefits the whole.
Now, we've talked about a lot of different aspects of leading through change and uncertainty, but ultimately it comes down to having the right skills, the right mindset, and the right approach. The sources we looked at also delved into developing these essential leadership skills.
Yeah, one skill that really stood out to me, perhaps more than any other, is emotional intelligence. Being able to understand and manage your own emotions is essential, especially when you're under pressure. But it's also about being attuned to the emotions of others. Empathy, the ability to truly understand how your team members are feeling and what they're going through, that's so crucial in these situations.
Yeah, a lot of people think of leadership as being strong and decisive, which is important, but it's also about being compassionate, about connecting with people on a human level.
Right. And then there are the more strategic skills that are also crucial, like strategic thinking. Being able to anticipate future trends, being able to analyze complex information and make sound judgments even when the situation is fluid. Developing those critical thinking skills and that ability to see the bigger picture is what allows leaders to make informed decisions, even when they don't have all the answers.
And of course, we can't forget about communication. That's always essential, but it becomes even more so during times of change.
Absolutely. Being able to communicate clearly, concisely, and empathetically is crucial for building trust, for inspiring your team, and for keeping everyone moving in the same direction.
Hmm.
And it's about tailoring your communication to different audiences, making sure you're speaking in a way that resonates with each person you're talking to.
And bringing it all together, it seems like resilience and adaptability, those are not just qualities we want to see in our teams, but also in ourselves as leaders.
Exactly. Leaders need to model those qualities. They need to embody that growth mindset. They need to embrace challenges as opportunities for learning, and they need to be able to bounce back quickly from setbacks. Because the reality is, no matter how well you plan, how effectively you communicate, you're going to face challenges. You're going to make mistakes. And it's that ability to recover, to adapt, and to keep moving forward that really distinguishes effective leaders from the rest.
This has been such a rich conversation. It's clear that leading through change and uncertainty is complex. It requires a deep understanding of people, a commitment to open communication, a willingness to adapt, and a strong ethical compass.
And it's about fostering a culture where people feel supported, where they're empowered to make decisions, and where they have a shared sense of purpose. It's about creating an environment where the organization can not only survive change and uncertainty, but potentially even thrive because of it.
And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this exploration of leadership with purpose. We hope this has given you some valuable insights and food for thought as you navigate your own leadership journey. We encourage you to like and subscribe to support the channel and to delve deeper into these topics to see how they apply to your own unique context. Until next time, keep leading with purpose.